Okay, yes.
Okay,
You may begin. Yeah.
Great. Then, hi everyone. I'm Anna, and I will be your host today on behalf of Product People. We are a German-based consultancy, and we help companies efficiently develop great products. So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, we help our clients fill a temporary need in our client's organization by acting as interim product managers or product owners, also called freelance product managers owners, meaning we help our clients with product management related matters until they can find a full-time product managers, which we can do for several months or maybe a year or sometimes even longer. So if you do know anyone in need of such service, remember we're always happy to help. And furthermore, together with you, we form a community of over 5,000 members, and we conduct these weekly meetings every Tuesday. And today, as always, we have a guest who will talk to us about an exciting topic from the product management world. Discussion subsequently followed by a Q&A session and a friendly networking event on Zoom, to which we invite you all dearly. Before we start, we just want to showcase some of our clients we had the pleasure and honor of working for and serving. We have Scouts, Tier, also Zalando and Freeletics, which is our guest today. Also, another announcement, and then we can go back to business. We are also hiring an experienced product manager with several years of experience in the field that will join our team, become our colleagues, and also help us train new PMs and grow together with us. So today we have the pleasure to talk about experimentation in product management with our guest, Erin McLaine. As I said, from Freeletics, she is a director of product. Erin, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about such an exciting topic. We're very much looking forward to your presentation. Please, you have the mic.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I've been working with product people for about almost 6 months now. And we're currently using an interim product manager at Freeletics for a role that we weren't able to fill so quickly. And so we've been super happy with that relationship, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about experimentation.
Thank you, Erin. We're so happy to hear such kind words.
Yeah, no problem. So I will share my screen.
Yes, we can see well.
Looks good. All right. Then, yeah, I would like to talk about experimentation in product management. And for the agenda today, I'll do a quick intro about myself, and then also talk about the background, about why we experiment, which I think is one of the most important things there is. How to get started in terms of really just dipping your toes in the water of experimentation if you're new to that space, and best practices and things that some lessons learned and tips along the way. And then we'll have some time for QA. So about me, I added a picture from actually yesterday, since I took a long weekend and had some holidays at the beach with my family. I've had 17 years of product management, and that has been in both New York City and Berlin. A variety of different companies, a lot of e-commerce and subscription businesses, some gamification, also did some health and fitness in the past in the United States, music industry, and then 6 years in the food delivery industry at Delivery Hero. I have some of those companies ranged from 15 people to 10,000 people. And over the past, during the time at Delivery Hero, I spent 5 years focusing on experimentation, and I'll tell a little bit more about how I got into that topic later. But after that, I wanted to move back into the broad scope of products. So I had a short time at Home to Go working in the vacation rental industry at the very beginning of the pandemic, which was a very poor time to join the travel industry. But it has ended up with me being at Freeletics for just about a year now. It'll be a year in July, and I've been super happy as the director of product at Freeletics. And I also feel like I've found my sweet spot in terms of a company size that I'm looking for. So 150 to 250 people, I find, is really the range that I want, because I want a family kind of atmosphere with somewhat of a startup feeling, but also some processes in place. So it's been really great being here. And I have boy-girl twins who are almost 3 years old. And yeah, I've been living in Berlin for 8 years, and my husband is German. And it's a lot of people say we have our own A/B test going on with the twins. So why experiment? And first of all, I say you can't always rely on user testing. So one example of that is Brexit, because according to anything you read in the news before it happened, it wasn't supposed to happen. And I also found that to be the case for the US presidency several years ago. So a lot of times, if you just talk to users about what they're going to do and they're not really being forced to make a decision, you might find that they can mislead you. Next is the capability to learn and make better decisions. So we find that especially early on, a lot of the things that you think might work actually don't impact customer behavior. So there might be a chance that you're disappointed in the beginning when you don't have huge successes out the door, but every one of those experiments, if you're not making a positive impact, is a learning and a lesson that, okay, we have to make bigger changes or do things differently if we really want to impact the customer behavior. Next is opportunity to grow at an exponential rate. So if you're constantly releasing things and you don't know the true impact that they're having on the audience, then there may be things that bring your whatever metric you're going after, say conversion rate. There may be things that positively impact this. There may be things that negatively impact this. There may be things that don't impact it at all. And so in the end, you find that your growth can go kind of like this, and maybe eventually it's slowly going up. But if you're testing things and experimenting on small portions of the audience, then everything you release to 100%, you've proven is making a positive impact. And that line can go exponentially higher. And the fourth reason is because we can. With my 17 years working in product, I have so many experiences looking back to the beginning of my career where we would build something in a very waterfall method, build something for 3 months or 6 months, and then release it, and then go into fire drill mode because all of a sudden our numbers crashed and we had to roll back. And so there doesn't have to be these disasters anymore. And I find that amazing. So, which is, I think, one of the biggest reasons for me that I got so excited about experimentation once I started really doing it. So how to get started. Number one is check your data. If your data isn't working, nothing else will work. So really understanding your metrics, making sure you're understanding how many users are coming to your app or your website, and how many people are bouncing, how many people are continuing to the next step. And that also gets into the next step of knowing your funnel. So this helps determine the best opportunities. When we started experimenting at Delivery Hero, we kind of put all of our experiments on the homepage just because it was bold and the first place that people landed, and we didn't really have a lot of knowledge yet. So we started doing things there, but in the end, we learned that actually our homepage was working pretty well, and we should work on something like a menu page or the restaurant listing page instead if we really wanted to impact our overall conversions in a bigger way. Next is don't try to be perfect. So this is another way to say learn from your mistakes. I find that with a lot of businesses, they kind of hold back with experimenting because they just want to learn more. They want to get a team set up. They want to get all the right tools and all the right processes, and maybe go through a lot of hoops in terms of determining what's going to be the very first experiment we should run. And I say just go for it. Start small, get things done, and it's okay if you run an experiment and then you find out you actually didn't have the tracking set up properly, you don't have any data. Every piece is a learning experience, and I would, from my side, I always would rather get started, especially in the area of experimentation, since we're not taking a huge risk. So we would always launch things on 5 or 10% of our audience, split that 50-50 between 2 different variations of an experiment, and therefore we weren't really impacting things. And of course, making sure that we're going through QA so we're not breaking the website. But on the back end, if the tracking is broken and stuff, you can learn those things afterwards. So I say get started if you can. And the last one is dedicate a resource. This is where I say no excuses. I think having somebody dedicated to experimentation is one of the best things you could do if you really want to get into it, because from my experience, I had so many different companies that said, we want to experiment, we want to A/B test, but we don't have time, we don't have the resources, and there was always some excuse. And so the story of how I got into it was that when I was a senior product manager at Delivery Hero, my boss, who was the CEO of our business, our UK business, he knew that my husband had moved to Berlin because I had moved to Berlin from America. My husband moved from the other side of Germany, and he was basically staying at home and studying web development all day. And so my boss knew this, and at one point he said, you know what, why don't we just hire your husband and have him run some A/B tests? And I was like, okay, sure. We can do that like 3 days a week and see how it goes for 3 weeks. If it works out, we can continue. And it worked out really well. And the best part about it was that my husband didn't have access to the code. He couldn't touch the back end code. He couldn't actually make changes except for on A/B testing. And that was really beneficial, because then when we experienced a crunch time where we needed to get a project done, I couldn't pull him off and say, hey, I need actually all the developers I can get. I need you to help towards this project as well. He had to stay focused in A/B testing, and that was really beneficial for us. So I thought that was a cool way to get started. I think there's also ways to get started even with just a product person. There's a lot of tools and opportunities within A/B testing and experimentation tools that allow you to do visual editing that don't require heavy programming knowledge. And so I think that's also a great way to get started if you're lacking a development resource to dedicate. So best practices, pick a tool, build or buy. So either way, it's an investment of time or resources. Some options are cheaper than others. And so at the beginning, we used a visual website optimizer. This was one of the cheapest ways we could get started. And because we had somebody who had some coding experience implementing the experiments, it worked really well for us. As we got better and learned more and got up and running bigger and bigger, we moved over to Optimizely, and we also used Optimize for app testing. So the important thing that we learned there was that the traffic should be well distributed. And during that time at Delivery Hero, so I was working on the UK product, and after focusing on experimentation for maybe 6 months or so, I went to my CEO and I said, I want to be doing this full time. I think this is so amazing after working in these fire drill modes. I think it's amazing that we can have this learning and release with confidence. And we have other businesses in Delivery Hero that aren't doing this. So we had products in different countries around the world, and they were just releasing things. So this was supported by the business, and we moved over to the international product team and started traveling to the teams around the world to get them up and running and also share best practices with them. One of our teams down in South America was so excited by it that they went ahead and dedicated some developers and built their own tool. So even though we were using some tools and had some partnerships, they said, we want to build a tool in-house as well. And that was totally fine with us. It didn't matter which way you're getting it done, just as long as you're doing it. The cool thing about working with a tool is building relationships. So we found that focusing on experimentation at Delivery Hero, we since it was pretty new to the company overall, we didn't have a lot of people that we could, you know, share knowledge with and learn new things. And so this was also a time when there wasn't so much out there on the web that we could search in terms of experimentation. There weren't so many books about it. And so it was hard to learn. And I think there's a lot of information now. There's a lot more, at least. Of course, there's a lot of conflicting information, and it's hard to find what you need. So I think that building relationships through some of the tools that we worked with was one of the best things we did. So making a strong relationship with Optimizely, we would speak at some of their conferences or just attend their conferences and listen to other people speak. And this was a really cool way to keep on learning about experimentation because it is always changing. Have a platform for sharing experiments and results regularly. So this is really about making experimentation public, making it standard, making it really visible. Everybody should understand what's going on, should have access to it, and if possible, also make it fun. So one of the things we started was that when we released an experiment, we let people bet on what they thought the winning variation was going to be. And maybe everybody who guessed correctly won something or won like points towards something. And if you got it correct after five times, then you would win movie tickets or something. So it turned into a game, and that was cool in terms of the visibility. Next one is learn and repeat, revisit, and take risks. I think this speaks for itself. So if you're going to run an experiment, I think that there's always a case where you can learn no matter what the result is. Like I said, even if it's negative, you're learning something about your audience. There is a place where you can also iterate and say, okay, well, that didn't work, but we still have a hypothesis that we believe is going to get us somewhere. And so we want to do a new iteration. And there's also a case where even if you have something that's successful, it might be good to revisit that experiment 6 months or 12 months down the road, because things are regularly changing and consumer behavior and perception also changes. One example that I like in terms of an experiment was we went to a conference where somebody was up on stage and they were talking about video backgrounds on the homepage of a website. And this was very popular at the time. Airbnb was doing it, PayPal was doing it. I mean, Netflix, maybe a couple of the big names. And somebody got on stage and they said, yeah, video backgrounds. Just because everybody else is doing it, you shouldn't do it because you're not Airbnb and you're not PayPal and you're not Netflix. And so like, this isn't something that gets customers in. And we heard this and we were like, I mean, interesting thought, but I don't know. And then actually our marketing team came to us and said, we want to put a video on the homepage and we want to have like skewers of food that's turning and moving and, you know, maybe not a super vibrant video, but something that has some movement and maybe it makes people hungry. And we said, okay, well, we have capability to experiment. Let's experiment. It was one of the most successful experiments we did. It was like a 14% relative increase in the conversion from the homepage to the restaurant listing page. And so I think that you always have the opportunity to take risks no matter what other people say. And also make your own best practices. So this is about areas where you should understand what your business is in terms of a business cycle. So for example, at Delivery Hero, we said our standard business cycle was 1 week, and we saw that traffic was very different on the weekend than during the week. And so therefore we wanted minimum 2 weekends of cycle for every experiment. So no matter if you had a ton of traffic coming in the first 3 days, we said, we don't care. We don't want results in the first 3 days. We want you to have 2 weeks business cycle to understand those different variations of our business cycle. And I also think there should be a maximum there. So we also said, you know, by the time you've reached 4 weeks or maybe 5 weeks, absolute maximum, if you haven't reached statistical significance and you're not getting somewhere, or maybe you're not even getting the traffic that you need to, then turn it off and revisit, because we need to be dynamic, we need to be agile, we need to keep on moving. So I think there's also a place for saying, let's move on. Best practices also in terms of, you know, what kind of analysis you do. For me, again, this is kind of, it's up to the business. Like, do you do different types of statistical formulas? Do you do Bayesian or frequentist models? It's up to you guys. I would work with your own data team, you know, learn about the different knowledges, have some preferences, but also be open to learning. So we would, by the end of the time at Delivery Hero, we would go to the teams around the world, and it was great if we visited one of the teams and they were like, hey, we read something about this model and we'd like to talk more about it. And maybe it was something we hadn't learned about yet, so we got a chance to learn something new. Okay. And also I did want to mention running multiple experiments at the same time. That's also a conversation that we hit sometimes at Freeletics. You know, can we run 2 experiments at the same time? To me, the answer is always yes, as long as, you know, it's not too, if you were a user that experienced both things, would it break something? So as long as it doesn't break something, and as long as you're using a tool that is randomly distributing the audience, then it should be just noise, just regular noise that should be equally distributed. So if you're in experiment A, then the people in each variation should equally experience experiment B. So it shouldn't impact the overall relative impact of the test. Next one, important ones. So one of the biggest things we learned from this experience of working with all the different teams around the world, and like I said, this was a time when the other teams weren't really doing A/B testing. So we had to go to them and talk about, what is A/B testing? How do we do it? What are the tools we use? For a lot of the teams, we were doing the whole process. We would say, you know what, we will take it over. We'll look at your funnel. We'll get all the data. We will prioritize experiments. We'll give you ideas. We will implement them and give you the results. And then at the end, you just have to implement what's a successful test. Sometimes we ran into challenges even while we offered to take all this work on for them. We experienced things where the developers would say, but why? Why do we really have to A/B test? You know, shouldn't you be doing your homework in product management, and shouldn't you know what we're releasing and that we're gonna do positive things? And so this gets into the why that I discussed earlier. And really, I think it's great to find a relatable comparison so that people can understand, you know, as much as we do our homework, we can't always know everything, and we can't always predict the future, and we can't always put the customer in the exact shoes that they will be in when they're forced to make a decision. So we can't rely only on user testing or discovery. On the alternative, I think it's also really important that you don't use experimentation as an excuse to not do your homework. So that can also be a big risk of experimentation, that, you know, people can say, well, we have a lot of options ahead of us, we don't know what to do, so we'll just run an experiment. I think it's really important to do your homework, narrow down those options, and be confident about what you're doing. And then the next one is, actually, this is the final one, is executive stakeholder management. This was also it was a challenging thing at Delivery Hero, you know, working on this. So I am talking a lot about Delivery Hero just because, like I said, that's where I spent 5 years focusing on experimentation. And we went from a place where in the UK business, we were running maybe maximum 10 experiments a month. We got to a place where we were running about 1,000 tests a year globally, and I think even more than that afterwards. And however, that was a big mountain to climb. And so we were constantly working on the culture of experimentation. So our job became so much about sharing sharing information, sharing knowledge, making sure everybody understood what we were doing, understood the values. And we ran into challenges when this didn't always come from the top down. So when we would go to a country and talk to the other product managers about what we could do for them and how they could enable themselves with experimentation, and they were on board, there could also be situations where their chief product officer in their local country would say, well, you know what, we don't have time, we have to move faster. And, you know, wouldn't be coming to them and saying, okay, so have you run some experiments? And that excitement should come from the whole organization. I think that it's really important and valuable when the executive management is saying, you know, tell me about some experiments that you've run, tell me about some successes. I want to understand the results. And one of the best examples of that was our team in Turkey, Yemek Sepeti. They did an amazing job, and they really made sure it was a part of their culture in their office. So they would have an executive meeting where their CEO, basically the chief product officer, would present the last 2 weeks of experiments to the CEO every 2 weeks. And I thought that was really amazing that the CEO wanted to be involved, especially in a business that size. Yeah. And so I think that brings me actually to a close already. I hope that was valuable. I think that experimentation as a whole is something that everybody can do. I do think it's unique for every business. But I think there's always an opportunity, and I hope that these tips and tricks could help you get started if you're on that road to get there. Also, one more thing I forgot to mention, in terms of building relationships, one of the coolest things that I did was I made sure that I built relationships with people from other businesses who were working on experimentation. So we, in addition to going to the Delivery Hero entities, we made a trip to Austria and met with Runtastic. We went to London and met with BBC. We met with Audible here in Berlin, another couple products here in Berlin. And I think it was really cool because even though we weren't running the same business at all, because we were doing food delivery and everybody else was doing something different, it didn't matter because we all had the same challenges with experimentation. We all had the same challenges of how do we get started? How do we learn from each other? How do we get the buy-in from the executive management? How do we keep track of results? How do we, which tool do we use, etc. So these are all similar problems. It doesn't matter who you're talking about or who you're talking to, you can always talk about this topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you. Thank you so much for the insightful presentation and for your advice and the tips and for giving examples for all the advice you gave. Everyone, you're welcome to ask questions either verbally or in writing in the chat in Zoom. Or if you join from YouTube or Facebook, please write your questions there and we will gladly transfer your questions and ask them to Erin. We already have 3 questions on YouTube. So I would start with those, if it's okay with you. From Pavel. Hi, I've got a feeling that apart from simple UI or copy changes, color, position of buttons, CTA, etc., experiments are very time consuming. What are the best practices to improve that?
Yeah, I think that can be the case. And yeah, to be clear, we experimented on everything. We did have full rebranding. Full rebranding things, basically deleting a whole page and redesigning the entire page. We took big risks at different times. And I think one of the challenging things there was, the most challenging thing there was often about how do we make sure it's a good user experience and make sure that there's no flickering and that the user is, still experiencing a smooth product experience. But we were able to really work around most of that and make sure that the experience was smooth. I think that there's cases where you can do things. You can also use A/B testing for validation. So for example, a smoke test. A small example is we were talking about if we should use photos of the actual restaurants on the menu pages at Delivery Hero. And so on the menu pages, we just put a little button that said view photos. And then when people click on it, you say coming soon. And that helps us gauge interest in, like, you know, is this something that would impact 60% of users, that 60% of users want to see? Or is this something that actually only a small portion of the audience is interested in? And so I think that it's important when you're looking at something that's a much bigger scale of a test is, are there workarounds? Are there pieces that you can get learnings on to validate so that you don't have to maybe go the whole way early on? And potentially also different options. There could be different technical options. From our side, we would generally, since I said we had a really good relationship with Optimizely, so we would talk to their customer success manager and their developers, and they would help us often find ways to work around these things. Sometimes when we were testing a full-scale redesign, we would actually redirect the users to a whole new URL. And so we were able to make things work that way. So it kind of, yeah, depends on the situation.
Great. Thank you, Erin, so much for elaborating. I would take now some questions from the Zoom chat also. So from Yevgeny. Thank you, Erin. Would you recommend running a switch to a new platform as an experiment?
Is that like going from web to iOS, or? I mean, it's hard to say exactly what that scenario is. I think it kind of gets into the previous answer. It's really depends. I think it's a very business specific question. And is it possible? Can you redirect people there? But I don't know what I mean, it could be something that, yeah, instead of, I don't know. So say, for example, if you're talking about moving, I could only think of like web to iOS, for example. You could do that for like 50% of users and the other 50% stay on the web. So you can start seeing how many people drop off if you start forcing them to go to an app platform instead of a web platform. So you could definitely get those numbers on a portion of the audience rather than forcing that in the end. But again, that would really depend on the business case and the reasons that you're making that switch. What's the hypothesis behind it? So I think there's a lot more questions there.
Great. Maybe we will get to talk in detail about it. Until then, let's go a little to the next question. So thank you very much for the questions. Yes, please.
Like I'm not from the background of software. Like I've been working in construction, and I've been doing some businesses back in India. Recently, I moved to Berlin, and like I decided to switch my career into software domain, and I learned some technologies like the AWS, Docker, Kubernetes, some little bit of Python programming, Linux, and like then I came to know about this product management. Like it seems very interesting, and with the Erin's talk, it's so like I liked it a lot, like the way the things work. And I just needed to know how can I start my career in this. Like I have no previous experience in any kind of software domains. I just need to know how can I start my career in this.
Yeah. I mean, from my opinion, like I said, in my situation, my husband was studying web development, and my boss always asked about my home life in our one-on-ones, so he was very aware of this. In the meantime, my husband also had a friend who was working for a marketing company who also asked him to build some websites. So of course, the best thing I can say is get to know people. Is there somebody that you can do something for to be able to have some experience? doing any kind of classes, getting any kind of certificates to build out your profile and history, and potentially also looking for opportunities that might be more like an intern to be able to get your feet in the door. I've also seen a lot of people switch from different areas within tech, oftentimes starting out as customer experience or customer support managers to, answer emails, answer response to customers, and then be able to talk to people within the company to say, here's my idea, start pitching things and start getting known for your creativity and experiences.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Saran, for the question. Thank you, Erin, as always. Would anyone want to ask a questions verbally now? Otherwise, I'll move to another chat question.
I have a question. Is there ever any instance in which you have started an experiment and decided to end it prematurely, and what would cause such a scenario to happen?
I'm sure there have been, yes. It's oftentimes if we see the direction of the experiment going super negatively. I mean, that also gets into best practices about statistical significance, and if you want to be, you shouldn't really communicate anything until you reach statistical significance. But of course, some experiments will never reach statistical significance because they're not actually impacting the customer behavior. So there can be a situation where it just, it's something you were super excited about and the numbers aren't going there. So we would always talk about, when we did the calculations, we would talk about our confidence rate. So if something was 95% statistically significant, we were 95% confident that this is the way to go. And if this confidence level was 40%, and we were expecting this to be a really big change, and we have a certain amount of traffic, so that would be the thing, it's like, if we only have 100 users in each variation, then we wouldn't, that doesn't matter. Your numbers can be anything, because 1 or 2 users can make all the difference in the world. But if we reached, we had our own standards, like maybe 5,000 visitors per variation, and it had only been running for 2 weeks, and we still haven't hit statistical significance, but it's just not going in the right way, we would end things. There were also cases where I guess it's not technically premature in terms of, so I talked about best practices and said we had a rule that we should always run at least 2 weeks. However, there could also be something that's negatively statistically significant. So if the confidence was like 5% that this is a positive change, then it's statistically significant that it's a negative improvement for the customer experience. And then we could turn things off after a week or something. If we have a certain baseline of users and we know we're not going to get where we want. There could also be a situation depending on the business. So for example, at Freeletics, we have more traffic limitations than we did at Delivery Hero. So especially if we're testing on the paywall and the user funnel entering the product. So we have more, we have more limitations in terms of, we can't run 10 experiments there because we wouldn't get enough traffic in a realistic amount of time. So we need to really pick what are the best experiments that we can run. So I think that's also a case where we can say, okay, look, if it's been a certain amount of time and the numbers really aren't looking good, maybe we do want to move on.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Renee, for the question. We do have a lot of questions. So great interest this evening. From Christoph, thank you for the talk, Erin. Can you talk a little bit about how you go from idea to A/B test? What is the process between these 2 points? How do you choose what you send into an A/B test?
Sure. A lot of this is basic product management prioritization in general. So this, like I said, one of the key points here is understanding your funnel. So where are the biggest opportunities? For example, at Delivery Hero, we also very rarely experimented on the paywall, or sorry, not the paywall, the checkout, because most of the people, by the time they went through the whole process of adding all the food to their cart and entering all their information, they were hungry, they wanted their food. And so 95% would actually check out. So this wasn't, and by that time, you have also fewer and fewer people than you did at the beginning of the funnel. So if you increase that number, then it's a smaller portion of the audience that you're influencing. So therefore, that's where we found the best impact that we could make was earlier in the funnel on the restaurant listing page or the menu pages. And that also had to do with platforms. So there were some countries where the usage was 100% or 90% on iOS, and all the other platforms really didn't matter. So we would only look at that funnel. So we really used the metrics to help guide us. And then from there, we would start building hypotheses and say, okay, well, if the restaurant listing page is the page with the problems, what could be some of the things that are causing users to drop off here? And is it that the restaurant logos, which, I mean, the restaurant logos don't tell you the quality of a restaurant. So so making the reviews more visible, or showing the number of reviews and giving more qualitative information to the customers rather than a restaurant logo that's actually not helpful in terms of what food you're picking. I mean, it's helpful for recognition, but not helpful for actual quality. So different kind of hypotheses about like this. And then, so we would basically hypothesize, use the funnel to narrow down our target area, and then come up with some hypotheses about what could be the problems and some experiments that we would run to solve these problems. And then we would prioritize those based on standard prioritization. What would be the business impact and potentially for this change? Is it a small, is it a button color, or is it a whole redesign? What would be the business impact, the potential customer impact, and the development time. So always, always also gets into the development size of effort. Is this something that's going to take us a week to implement? Is it going to take 2 months to implement? It is going to be a lot harder to launch something or to prioritize something that's going to take 2 months, especially if we're really unsure about the value.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's take another question from YouTube. From Srinath, is experimentation really possible for B2B products, which are constantly working to roll out client requested features?
Not necessarily, no. I would say I have talked to people who I personally haven't been in the B2B space very much. So my experience does not lie there. And however, I've also talked to people where they said, the other businesses are their clients, and their job is to make their clients happy. And so if they talk to their clients and their clients say, you should build this, then oftentimes that's what they build. And it's really about the client happiness then, as opposed to the question is what metrics would you be trying to move there in terms of A/B testing? So I think it probably depends on the B2B business, and also how big that client size is. If you launched something as an A/B test, do you have certain metrics that you can track, and then can you get enough usage out of that to see that you're able to move the needle? It could be something that, I don't know if it's like a tool that another business is using, and maybe the goal is that they find things more effectively and therefore they spend less time, or they like viewing multiple pages or clicking on things. I mean, so there are definitely things you could measure there. The question is, would you get the right value out of that you need for the success of your business? Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll take another question from YouTube if it's okay with everyone. From Dilna, when do you consider an experiment is a success or a failure? Is it a strict measure, like more than 50% of the users in the A/B test should show good results for the experiment?
So a success or a failure, strictly speaking, has to do with the statistical formula you use to evaluate the results. So if you're using a tool, then a lot of these tools have this built in. We often exported our results and had our own spreadsheet where we did our calculations based on the Bayesian model. And so in that case, a success was technically anything that was above 95% statistical significance. So like I said, 95% confidence that this would be a positive change on the user experience. However, in a non-strict sense of the word, I would also say that, depends on how you frame the word, but to me, it's every test is a learning. So not a success, but a learning. And so it's really important that even if we're talking about failures, I almost, I don't even like that word, because yes, a test was unsuccessful. It doesn't mean it was a failure. It doesn't mean we didn't learn something. It doesn't mean we didn't try something. It doesn't mean we didn't try a risk. So I wouldn't say that we have failures, but yeah, we can have things that we learn that, okay, these don't have the impact on the audience that we really expected them to, and we go from there. So, but strictly speaking, in terms of having a success, is a positively statistically significant test. One note there is that there can also be situations where you test for no change. So for example, we had things that would come in from marketing, or maybe a product feature that we build specifically for long-term retention, and we're simply making sure that it doesn't negatively impact the customer experience. So we had situations where the marketing team wanted to change, not the video test that I talked about, but other situations where, for example, they want to put up a Christmas background for the holidays. And so we would say, okay, but we're still going to launch it as an A/B test and make sure that it doesn't negatively impact the experience. It doesn't have to be positively statistically significant. We just have to make sure that it's flat.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's take a couple of questions from also the Zoom chat. From Azar. How do you generally go about making hypotheses? What is the central idea behind every hypothesis?
Yeah, I was looking at this question in the chat, and in general, I don't have a standard answer for that. On my side, it goes into the previous answer about really understanding where's the best opportunity. And from there, I mean, it could also be about looking at competitive research. So for example, again, focusing on this restaurant listing page, if we were looking at that in Delivery Hero and we knew that this is a problem page, we might look at 5 different competitors and say, oh, well, it's interesting that the competitors are doing things this way. So maybe our hypothesis is that it's, too much noise for the users when we do things different. And so I think a lot of cases, it really depended on where was the problem area that we're trying to solve, and that would help us discover some of the hypotheses. Yeah.
Okay. I would take another question from YouTube, and we will soon, in a couple of minutes, end the streaming. So that's why I would take a question from YouTube, so we make sure all are covered. So another question from Pavel. What if, while running a test, you wonder what was the behavior for different segments? Do you do the test for each segment separately?
From our side, we would usually be able to dig into that in the results afterwards. So when we were looking at results, we would always break out new users versus returning users based on the traffic, based on the audience. You know, it was much more important that the new users saw an impact than the returning users, because returning users were reliable. So if we made a positive change for the returning customers, of course that's valuable, but it's more valuable if we really see an impact on new visitors. So this is really important. It could also get into cases where we would break out different type of further segments from there. You know, different countries or regions, cities. I mean, you could do all kinds of different things, demographics. But from my experience, we always had so much to do that was really focused on the whole customer base, that we didn't really get that much into targeting with our experiments.
Okay, also related from Pavel, should a user take part in only one experiment in their lifetime? How do you assure that? So
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
how are recurring?
no.
How do you treat recurring users?
Yeah, I mean, to me, recurring users, it's no problem. I mean, a user can also be experiencing multiple A/B tests at the same time. If you have, you know, done your homework behind this and know how to set it up within your business, it's no problem, as long as these A/B tests aren't conflicting with each other, as I said earlier. So in theory, a user could be in multiple A/B tests at the same time, and they can also, you know, experience one month and a different one the next month. It really shouldn't be a problem.
Great.
I mean, in theory, the user shouldn't really know that they're in an A/B test. I mean, yes, if they are, depending on the product, if they use it all the time, super regularly, yes, they may notice changes. But I think that's also, we all notice changes on everything. I mean, on the products that we use the most, we notice changes. We know that things are happening. We, in general, should appreciate that people are working on the product, I think. I hope so. Yeah.
Yes, of course, that's true. We do have still two questions in the chat, after which I suggest we stop the streaming and do a little chit chat. Okay, from Tejas, which book or blog would you recommend for going in depth on product experimentation?
And I'm sorry, I don't have a recommendation here. I haven't, honestly, like I said, I haven't done a lot of reading on the topic besides using the web. There wasn't a lot of books at the time on this topic. The biggest tool that I found was making connections, getting to know people in the industry, getting connected with other people on LinkedIn and at conferences. Conferences that are focused on experimentation were, I mean, they were hard to find, but we loved them. And yeah, so really building relationship and talking to people about it was the best thing I could recommend there.
Great, thank you. Just to mention that Pavel thanks you very much for answering the questions and all the presentation. And we thank you to Pavel for your interesting questions. Okay, one more question from Dimitri. Sorry if I missed it. What was your biggest A/B testing success? How different was A from B?
Yeah, and so I did kind of talk about that a little bit. Really, the video tests with the moving background was a huge, surprising success. That was, we really had several different analysts dig into the data to make sure that the traffic was distributed randomly, because we were very surprised that such a small change could have such a change, and adding video could have such a big impact. Actually, that was also quite interesting, because what we found was that less people moved from the homepage to the restaurant listing page, but the conversion rate went way up. So the people so the theory was that the people who moved on were really heavily invested. You know, it was like it made the people who really wanted to order, it made them order. The people who were coming because they were curious or because of a marketing campaign dropped off quicker. So it was a super interesting test from our experience. I'll also mention one more that was I don't think it was the biggest success in terms of the relative impact, but it was a cool one because it got into that restaurant listing page on a mobile device. And so if you're looking at all the different restaurants you can order from, and there were these small tiles with the restaurant logo that I was kind of talking about. And we knew that the restaurant logo doesn't give you the value of the restaurant and the quality of the food. So we really wanted to optimize the space and rearrange the contents and try to make it successful without the logo, so that people were choosing restaurants based on their quality and based on reviews, based on this type of food, rather than a picture on the page of the logo. It wasn't even a picture of the food, it was the logo. So we did one iteration, we tried it and it didn't work, but we were still pretty confident in our hypothesis. And so we moved things around again. I think we even had maybe 2 different variations with the experiment. So it was it had the control variation A and variation B, and we did finally get to a successful result. So we were able to increase the overall conversion rate by removing those restaurant logos and making sure that people are ordering food based on better quality factors. So that was also pretty exciting.
Great. Thank you so much. I suggest we end the streaming part of our event and we continue together on Zoom with the networking session. Again, Erin, thank you so much for the advice, for the tips, for all the examples you provided us, and thank you everyone for asking these many questions and for your interest. And now we invite everyone to Zoom. We will post the link in the respective chat. And we also gladly invite everyone to our next week's event, same place, same time, when we will talk about more interesting PM topics. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, everyone, so much. Please join us on Zoom now. Take care.